he said, I lead the medical devices group. It is the world's largest medical device community with 330,000 members worldwide. That's enough about me. We've got 30 minutes. You've had a chance to meet Mary, and you've had a chance to meet Phil, so they are excluded from the introductions. David, if you kindly state briefly who you are, what you do, and how that might be relevant to today's group.
Certainly. My name is David Bashan. I'm the founder of Novion Technologies. Novion is an early stage pharmaceutics medical device company located in Spokane, Washington. We're on the WSU campus in the accelerator. Novion has basically created a family of, we've invented a family of pharmaceutical derivatives that are antimicrobials. They're in the silver family. The benefit is that they're at least 50 times less toxic than what's currently used today. So we own that IP, and we've folded that now into other devices, wound healing devices and coatings for medical devices. And so we're addressing topical infection prevention as well as medical device infection.
Thank you. Randy.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Randy Hamlin. I work for Philips, a large multinational. Inside Philips, I specifically work within the ultrasound division. And then even below that, I'm actually running a startup. And that's a little bit of a paradox when you look at a multinational and talk about running a startup inside that. This startup created 2 years ago that I'm running is intended to create new disruptive innovations in ultrasound. And we've created 10 months ago the world's first app-based ultrasound that runs off a bring your own device solution. It's an app that you download from Google Play, the physician receives. It's a subscription model, and so it's the first ultrasound as a service in the world. And it's been a crazy ride, and so I think it's relevant to understand the trends of healthcare that are happening around us and how a large multinational is addressing that challenge.
Thank you, Randy. Tom?
I've already had
Mary's
my turn.
excluded.
In the interest of
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be here. My name's Tom Clement. I'm a serial entrepreneur going on probably close to 40 years. And my company's Aqueduct Critical Care. We're developing products for managing cerebral spinal fluid post-brain surgeries. But one of the things I like about meetings like this, and I'm just going to shout out to 2 people. My very first project as an undergraduate was working for a PhD candidate on annular arrays. That PhD became the Chief Technology Officer for ATL and still is Philips Healthcare, and he's in the room today. Was happy to see him, dear friend. And young Code Zienelkoffer happens to be the son of a co-founder of my very first company. One of 3 of us that started Heart Technology, grew it to 550 employees, Mike and myself being mostly in the operational side. 100 million in sales, 200,000 square feet of operational, world-class operating facilities in Redmond. So it's nice for me to be here just to make some of these connections and ongoing connections, and looking forward to our discussion.
So it sounds to me as though it was a genetic thing.
Apple didn't fall far from that tree.
I personally like meetings like this because I met some of the members of the panel, and I don't mind saying every place I go that I'm an investor in Tom's company. This is not, anything other than I believe. So we'll learn more about that. I've been very impressed and frankly learned quite a bit about all the resources that are available in this state. And I'm going to ask you something that's not about money first. I received a call a week ago from a surgeon, a urologist, who had invented something, and he said, I spent $300,000 of my own money. I've got a bank loan for $700,000. Urologists say they love it, and I have no sales. Can you help? And we talked about it a bit, and the punchline was, no, I could not help, because the urologists were interested in the idea. Oh, I like this idea. But when it came to a value-based sale, the folks on the committee said, yeah, so no. So my question for you is not about value-based, but rather for the entrepreneurs in the room, what are the resources in Washington State to help validate an idea that had he spoken to the right people, he might not be $1 million in the hole anymore? And I'll turn it to the audience if we don't collectively know that.
I just said it's a pretty difficult question. I spent 4 or 5 years working at Center for Commercialization UW, and it's a little easier there because you have the networks amongst the researchers. But if you're just an entrepreneur on the street, you're going to have to make some phone calls and you have to work at it. But I strongly encourage it.
I could talk to that a little bit. I think the community here in the Northwest, especially in Seattle, is full of seasoned and experienced former medical device entrepreneurs and experts. And certainly when I started my business, I think it was actually a good thing that I was trying to raise funds, because I would start to talk to some of the groups in the area, Wings or Kretsu, some of the others. And as I started to raise funds, I'd get feedback from some of the experts on their committees that were part of the screening committees. And some of their feedback was quite helpful in forming our business model and adjusting the business model. And I think that this individual, had he tried to raise funds perhaps from some of the angel groups, he might have received feedback early on asking about reimbursement and who's going to pay for this. And those are all questions that need to be answered early on. And perhaps had he tapped into that network, might have been able to have some of those questions answered earlier.
If you wanted to add.
Very, very good comments and very, very applicable here. Life Sciences Washington has a more formalized program, the WIN program, which is really pretty tremendous. The way that works is, first an application process, but second to that, once you are actually into the program, you have, 3 up to 4 mentors assigned to you. And I'm in the program presently, and I have found it to be extremely insightful. It's really awesome, and all of the mentors that have been assigned to help me with my business have been tremendous.
No,
so I would recommend that.
This isn't your first go-around in entrepreneurship, is that right?
It is not.
And yet you're in this program. Let's talk a little bit about that. I would think, hey, I'm brand new, I have an idea, I need all the help I can get. You're more seasoned, so what is it you see at your level that has you continue that membership?
Well, so as an entrepreneur, so anybody that's in it already, you know how easy it is to get distracted. And that's, crucial, something to keep in mind when you're moving forward. And so if you have multiple market segments that you can attack, perhaps the way you've been thinking about it isn't always the right way to think about it, or the best way to think about it. And so getting a committee of 3 or 4 people to table this for discussion and look at the problem in different ways, I found to be extremely insightful.
Now, Phil, this is your first go-around as an entrepreneur, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. And I couldn't agree more with both Mary and Dave as well. I was a graduate of the WIN program through mentorship, and we were fortunate enough that I think that's part of the advice I would give to someone like that is surrounding yourself with people who are not in your wheelhouse, like not other urologists, for example, but other advisory people on the board that could help with commercialization, as well as crafting the strategy very early on. Our strategy pretty early on has been and will continue to be licensing the devices out, and in doing so, we surround ourselves with people who had a lot of experience doing that, and that got us in front of these major manufacturers and suppliers who also helped guide the testing process, which is, I think, is a key factor in that example you gave, where this testing process not only covers functionality, but it also covers pricing. It covers, obviously willingness to buy, and also any sort of advice on product changes and enhancements. And we developed our product very quickly because of the resources.
Thank you. Show of hands, how many on the panel have ever received funds from the state for their enterprise? Okay. And how many of you have received resources of some kind from the state? Okay. So would you kindly talk about those and how folks in our audience might be able to access them as well?
Well, it's already been mentioned that PIA has received funds from the state. I think they're federal funds actually, but it's facilitated through the state of Washington. The STEP grant supporting export business abroad. So we've been able to, I think it's been 4 grants that we've had since the company started. That's been very helpful.
Yeah, I've taken advantage of a number of programs. My last two companies I've spun out of the University of Washington, and there are many programs while you're on campus that you can take advantage of. And Lyndon here started several of them. There's grants that are given for just proof of concept work, $50,000 at a time. They're great to give yourself some confidence in what you're doing. The Life Science Discovery Fund, which unfortunately has now gone away, they gave us a very nice grant, with which we were able to build our prototype, and I was able to go out and raise money. The W Fund, I think, is another one that has certainly benefited myself and many other research companies spinning out of research institutions in the state. So there's a number of those if you kind of look around. Even WRF, I see represented in the room here, they have grants that they give to folks largely on campus, I believe, Kim. I don't know how broadly that goes outside research, but again, I think you have to kind of look around and find those things, and these little pockets of money can make a big difference.
Do you have anything to add? No. Dave, I know that you have been successful gaining NIH funding. Can you talk about that?
Certainly. So to date, both of the companies that I operate today have basically been reared on non-dilutive funding through the NIH, the DoD, and it looks very promising now for an NSF award coming here very, very soon. So essentially, it's a trial by fire kind of approach to growing your company, but it can be done if you really believe in your idea. You just need to get to it and sit down with with some directions on how to craft a proposal, get some good advice from your network, and learn how to tell your story in 6 pages.
Randy, with you being the big company represented at the table, I'm sure it'll be a matter of interest to our audience about how strategic partnerships might work with you as a way to get a leg up as they get started. Would you comment?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the conversation earlier, question of startups and focus on often too much on the technology versus the opportunity and the value add, the value proposition. I think 3/4 of startups that approach us with a technology concept lack that business thought process of how is this a reimbursable event? What's the competing technologies of this device? And it's often a big miss, frankly. We also look and recognize that obviously great ideas come from many different sources, and we constantly are pushing ourselves to get better, frankly, at being receptive to partners. We have, in my little startup, we've created several partnerships already with local Seattle-based, Seattle area firms to help us develop certain technologies that we didn't have organically, and certain applications that we felt were huge benefits for us. And so we are, even though we're a large entity, are really reaching out locally and tapping into those resources in this area. Because as we talked about ultrasound, this is a great place to have an ultrasound business, and there's lots of firms out there that really have a heads up on technology.
So just to give something a bit more concrete, one of our presenters has an ultrasound concept. Say he were to approach the company, where would he start? Do you have a perspective on the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually start with reaching into an organization in business development, or a person like myself. If anybody in the room, for example, has something like that, contacting me directly, I could either funnel them to the right place or entertain that idea. So it really starts with that conversation without a non-disclosure is what we like to start with, frankly. Just understand strategically how it fits, and then it can progress from there. So that's as basic as it gets.
Okay. So I'd like to talk about the size of an opportunity. When you won some funds from the state, how did you characterize the market size and potential of your company? And was that a factor in for example, a proof of concept? Would they give $50,000 to an idea that maybe does $500,000 a year in sales or $1 million, or is that too small? Can you give us a sense of, you know, where the cutoff is in terms of, is this idea big enough? Anyone?
Since I raised some of those small grant opportunities, I'll start. The process itself, as it was run at the university, was pretty serious, right? People put in an application, what are you going to get for your, what are you going to produce for your $50,000? Part of the rules were couldn't go to salary, had to go to and so. And I think it was pretty rigorous. I sat on several of those panels, and if you didn't have something, it didn't have to be like a $1 billion opportunity, but it had to be something that really had a market. Some of the other resources that were put around those companies were entrepreneurs in residence. I see several out here who came to and help companies do that, so build a business plan, some other things that were ancillary to the whole program. It's pretty serious.
That's fine. So, as I mentioned, I lead this group, and one of the discussions I had with a large audience was a subject about, if you had a $10 million idea, should you bother? I was on a panel, not unlike this, some time back, and 3 entrepreneurs said, yeah, that's a throwback idea. No VC is going to bite, and if you're going to work hard at something, it better be a huge idea if someone is ever going to invest in the company. So, for example, I heard an idea or two in the showcase earlier, and I thought, is that a $10 million idea, $20 million? What would you say to encourage or discourage someone who has an idea that there's definitely a need, I could absolutely see, you know, it working, but there's just not a lot of money there. So how likely is it that they're going to get the kind of support that they need to see that come to fruition? Of course.
So I guess the first thing I would say is, how passionate are you about, you know, addressing the issue? I mean, if it's near and dear to your heart, then I think that $10 million is nothing to scoff at. You're not going to get a VC to fund it, but you can actually potentially raise non-dilutive funds to, you know, to bring your idea forward. I would say that I don't think NIH would scoff at a $10 million opportunity if it solves a problem that's worth solving. So there are ways to raise those funds, and you don't always have to go through, you know, someone who's going to invest in your company.
Others?
I could add to that a little bit. Yes, passion is certainly an important factor in starting any business. One thing I would add to that is that sometimes it's hard to know how big the market really is. And it takes getting started with an idea, and as it starts to grow and people become aware of your solution, there's other applications that you may have never even thought about. Our company, I think, is a good case in point for that. We started with cardiac MR, which is very much of a niche market, and the business model we had built was actually applicable across other imaging modalities. We had companies coming to us very quickly for cardiac CT. They had some needs there. And just building an awareness for a solution, sometimes it's applicable across a bigger market than you might realize.
Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that because that's exactly the type of boat we're in, right? We've raised a total of about $325,000, and I don't think we need to raise another dime. And what it ended up happening was we started off with one concept. The passion to innovate inside of dentistry was there. We had one product we started with, and through relationships with other dentists, other idea generators, partnerships with our investors who also are helping in the engineering front, in 18 months, we've now developed 5 additional products for dentistry, and now the company's valued at around $7 to $8 million. So that happened in 18 months simply because we knew we had a passion to innovate inside of the space, and the space was ripe for innovation, but looking back 18 months, it was only one idea and maybe a $5 to $10 million opportunity. That's now since grown and expanded into something that, you know, could be worth much more than $10 million, to both Mary and Dave's point. So I think it starts with passion, of course, but when you look at, you know, an idea or a product, it starts with how far do I want to take it, but also what it's going to take to get there. If the company can get to 10 million, you only have to spend 300,000 to get there. It's a very viable opportunity. So I think there's a lot of things at play, but yeah, there's always a reason to say no, and I think that's hurtful to a lot of entrepreneurs in terms of stopping something because somebody told them it's not big enough, and things could really spiral very positively very quickly if you put your heart and soul into it.
I was very impressed with your presentation.
Thank you.
And you guys are doing great with this pace, so we're going to take a 5-second break and give him the applause he deserves. No, that's a really great story. Thank you. Matt, oh please, by all means.
The big company guy, I guess, in answering it from a different viewpoint, the question about size of opportunity. I think we don't have a fixed size that says it needs to be a $50 million opportunity before we want to talk to somebody, because it's really based upon puzzle pieces that we're putting together for a complete solution. And that piece may be a relative small element, but when you add it to these other pieces, it represents the huge opportunity, the big thing. So that's how we look at it. So I think I wouldn't hesitate if something is a $5 million opportunity as it stands by itself, because it could represent as a puzzle piece much bigger.
Okay. So actually, I'm going to build on that. Dave, you said, yeah, a VC is probably not going to bite at something south of 10 million, and that there are other sources for non-dilutive funding. So would you talk to us about that?
Certainly. So aside from the federal available funds through a number of different institutions, of course NIH has many different institutions, but the Department of Defense has a variety of different requests for proposals that are put out on a regular basis. I've been become very familiar with the CDMRP, which is the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, and I've found that to be really quite good. But they also, the Army, the Navy, etc., they all have their own SBIR programs as well. So in addition to that, in Spokane County, we have the Health Sciences Services Authority of Spokane County that has a matching grant opportunity. So for anybody that's in Spokane County or anybody that's willing to relocate their business to Spokane County, the HSSA will match up to $500,000 for a single application with a cap at $1 million. So if you have, if you're mobile and you secure say a phase 2 or a number of phase 1 applications from any of those institutions in healthcare, you could actually locate your business in Spokane County and receive full matching funds up to $500,000 for a single application. It's a great opportunity.
Others on the panel who have received non-dilutive funding? No? Okay, Tom?
Well, I've received several grants, like I mentioned, Life Science Discovery Fund grant. I've had one as TTR. And I commend anybody who gets in the system and can make it work for them, because it takes a lot of forethought and planning. And my frustration often was what we thought was going to be going on in 10 months when we submitted the application. Sometimes those situations have changed. So I've never personally got into the multiple grants. I know several people like yourself who have funded their whole companies on multiple grants, and they just intertwine them just right and make it work.
Phil, may I ask, where's your home? I mean, it's here, but you decided to base your company in Washington just because that's where you live, or because you said the program's in this state?
Yeah, both. I mean, we as I mentioned, we are from Vancouver, Washington, just down south. And I'll be completely honest, the fundraising market in Portland, Oregon is not the greatest. And we learned very quickly that, Washington, Seattle was the place to be. So my first presentation was to the Wings program about a year ago. And our lead investor came out of that meeting, which also introduced us to the Alliance of Angels. And we were able to close the funding very quickly. Again, it wasn't a very large ask, but the resources we have here in terms of specifically medical device fundraising, it was light years ahead of Portland in many ways. That was able to leverage that into a partnership with our second investor, who's also handling on engineering, which are based in Beaverton from Intel. But that wouldn't have happened without the initial push from and help from the Alliance of Angels and Wings. Specifically with our first fundraise, there's a lot of things you need to learn about convertible notes and paperwork and a lot of things that they helped guide us through, which is very helpful.
I'm interested from the panel, the notion of moving your company to Washington or from Washington. So Matt mentioned the chance that the sales tax exemption will lapse, so that we'll be hit with that. But I know that at the end of last year, the R&D tax credit lapsed, and you might argue that's an even bigger deal. My question for you is, when macroeconomic things happen in our state like that, does it give you time to pause and say, you know what, grass is looking greener in a different state? I'm thinking the inertia behind, I'm going to move my whole company headquarters somewhere else is a big deal that you'd like to avoid. So the first got to be really high. So as a negotiating tool, if you will, when we're talking to Congress and saying, we really need that R&D tax credit back, just among us girls, is there a real threat to that? Or, you know what, that's just it, we have to roll with it, and we're here, so that's how it's going to be. Anyone? And I would especially like to hear from Randy.
I was going to say the same thing. I'd love to hear from Randy on this, but I think a lot of it depends on the size of the company. So you look at a lot of companies end up where the inventor CEO lives. Largest patch company in the world is in Sandpoint, Idaho, and that's because the inventor CEO lives in Sandpoint, Idaho. And so I'm not about to move. There's no way. I get calls, you want to come to Miami, can you move to Cascade Mountains? Well, no. So I'm not interested. But I think what does happen when we get, those of us that are going to get acquired, then becomes a big question for the acquirer. And I'm very impressed with Philips for putting their national headquarters here. So I do think that's something Randy can address.
Yeah, and believe me, that topic comes up once every couple of years about consolidation of factories, of R&D footprints. And so footprint is a constant conversation. I think what has generated a strong connection to this Washington site is several businesses were in Washington. So the Sonicare business that Philips acquired from Issaquah or Snoqualmie is now co-located in the same campus. We've consolidated our healthcare sales team here, and so we've got a campus of 2,000 employees that, with a lot of talent and knowledge base, that it's going to be really hard to detach from this space, I can tell you that. There's a strong commitment that Philips has made, and I don't see it, I think the catastrophe would have to happen before we would have to be moved. And some of these issues are issues that you're raising, and it does hurt, but it's not near enough to knock us off the block.
Dave, do you happen to live in Spokane, and that's why your company is based there?
Well, I'm not from Spokane originally, so I relocated to Spokane from Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
Which is a bit unusual.
But was it?
I'll just leave it at that.
Of course, it was for the weather, and was it for?
Well, the weather's great, for a third of the year. So it's a bit more than that.
Was there a macroeconomic reason that brought you to Spokane?
There were several personal financial reasons for doing it. I actually had recently finished at Medtronic. I was part of the diabetes division, and so as Medtronic acquired the company, the group that I was running in the sensing area, glucose sensing area, was eliminated, and so I was sort of left to figure out what I was going to do. So I started my first company, and I needed a place to put it that was a lot more friendly than Los Angeles, because if you ever thought about a startup in LA, it's pretty challenging to find laboratories and whatnot to have access to. Lucky for me, actually, in the interim before I decided to move, I was on the faculty at Cal State Northridge, and I was in the business school, but I had access to labs in the chemistry department, so I did proof of concept there for the first company, and then I moved to Spokane into an accelerator. That was one of the reasons why, not the first reason. The primary reason was for my children to have access to good schools, and which we have very good schools in Spokane. So we made that move. We bought some acreage and put our horses on that acreage and adapted. It was a little bit of a challenge, but we did it. And with climate change, hey, perfect.
So as we conclude, and I thank our panel, and I thank our hosts for giving me the opportunity to wear a tie, I would like you each to conclude with finishing this sentence. To entrepreneurs looking to start and grow a business in Washington State, the one concept I would have you take advantage of in Washington, if you do nothing else, is go ahead and call the what organization, and how could they help a new startup, an entrepreneur, or a growing company. Phil, may I start with you?
That's tough. I guess it depends on what stage they're at. In our experience, based on where we were when we entered the need for outside resources, I would honestly say that the WINGS program. I think where we were at with the fundraising needs we had and the roadmap that we had in place, they allowed us to get in front of the right people, not just money, but contacts, efficacy, testing, things like that, and it really helped us launch the company.
Thank you, Phil. Wings for Phil. Tom?
Yeah, I'd go a little broader and say Life Science Washington, because they manage a lot of these programs, including WING, which we obviously had some success over here with, as well as WINGs, and their consulting availability.
Shout out to Leslie in the audience. So Phil is Wings and Life Science Washington for Tom. Mary?
I'd have to echo Tom, Life Science Washington, because of the breadth of the resources that they have. Wings, the WIN, Chris Porter, their advice early on, I would say Life Science Washington.
Thank you. Randy?
I have to be different, it's a little awkward, but call Phillips. Bring me your ideas.
Randy, would you share your home number?
I'll work it through you.
Yes. And Dave?
So I would echo the sentiment on Life Science Washington in the west part of the state, and in the eastern part of the state, I would say Ignite Northwest, which is a program that's sort of being developed to sort of mimic some of the things that are being done at Life Science Washington.
Okay.
It's a good resource.
That's 60% of our panelists say Life Science Washington. There's a trend there. Thank you all for your attention and to our panelists.